is my persuasive speech for Communications 101 at Liberty University. This moment, this second, there were more slaves in the world than at any other point in history. There are more slaves now than when there was the African slave trade going on, and there were more slaves than the Israelites. According to Free the Slaves, an organization that is dedicated to ending slavery in our lifetime, there are currently 27 million slaves in the world, and counting. According to Not for Sale, another organization that's dedicated to ending slavery, 80% of these slaves are women and children that are exploited and sold for the purpose of sex. This is known as the sex trade. And 800,000 of these people are transported across borders and sold internationally for sexual purposes. I worked in the Philippines this past summer, a poor country in Southeast Asia, and Southeast Asia is the main point for women and children to be kidnapped or sold into the sex trade or being transported other places. As Christians, this should anger us. This should make us really mad, especially since the sex trade is happening right here. American women and children are being kidnapped and sold here, along with people that have been brought from other countries. And also as Christians, we know that this isn't what God intended when He created things like sex. This isn't how it was intended to happen. So as American Christians, we should seek to end this sex trade. Tonight I'm going to explain how the sex trade works, where it happens, how it starts, how women enter it and how they stay in it, why God hates this, and finally how we can take actions to stop the sex trade during our lifetime. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services defines the sex trade as a modern-day form of slavery in which commercial sex is introduced by force, fraud, or coercion, and in which children are forced into sexual acts under the age of 18. Men and women and children are all affected by this disgusting practice, and like I said earlier, 80% are women and children. 27 million people that are in this trade is equivalent to the entire population of Texas and Utah. These people tend to be poor, women and children in Southeast Asia especially, who are lured into this trade by either being offered a job or a marriage, and sometimes parents are so desperate to provide for their other children that they actually sell their children into this disgusting practice. These people are then drugged and transported into other areas, often where they don't know the language, so that it's more difficult for them to escape. They're threatened to either be beaten or gang raped or to have something terrible happen to their family so that they don't escape. They're sold in various ways. Sometimes they're sold directly to people as prostitutes. Other times they're drugged, especially children, and work in brothels where they have multiple partners a night. And sometimes they're forced to do acts, which are then posted on the internet as porn films. God doesn't desire for this to happen, and so we should seek to end this. Originally, God created this for pleasure within marriage and also for procreation, and the sex trade totally distorts that. Romans 1:24 says, God gave them, humans, over to their sinful desires of the heart, of sexual impurity, and for degrading of their bodies with one another. And that's a perfect description of what's happening in the sex trade. It's taking something that was intended for good and manipulating it for something evil. It just goes to show that men can't control their own lust, which we're supposed to as Christians have self-control. And this causes them to even pay for this stuff to happen. It's a huge business. The Not for Sale campaign even says that it's worth a $9 billion industry. God also values our attempt to stop this practice. Psalms 82:3-4 says, defend the causes of the weak and the fatherless, maintain the rights of the poor and oppressed, and rescue the weak and needy, deliver them from the hands of the wicked. And that's what we're supposed to do as we attempt to help end the sex trade. Ron Hutchcraft, who wrote Battle for a Generation, also informs us that we are the wealthiest and most educated generations of Christians ever, and so we should have the ability to stop this. Even though this act is illegal everywhere, it is practiced in every single country. The 2000 Trafficking Victims Protection Act in the United States made sex trafficking a federal crime. And we can take steps to stop this practice by voting for people who are against the sex trade, supporting monetarily projects. There are housings being built in all countries, especially Southeast Asia, to rescue these women and children, and we can support children that way, such as through the Missions of Mercy's house in the Philippines. And the most important thing we can do as Christians is pray that this ends. As I said earlier, this is a totally disgusting practice that completely distorts God's original plan for sex and desires. As Christians, we know that these desires are a result of a fallen world, and we should take steps to end these horrors, such as electing officials who want to end this trade and supporting people who are also working to end this trade. It's also important to remember that these aren't just women and statistics. They're daughters and wives and sisters and mothers. And what would you do if your daughter was kidnapped, drugged, and sold, and raped repeatedly? You'd want somebody to step in and stop them, right? So what are you going to do to stop this? Thank you so much for coming and listening to me tonight.